And something to be learned is that how she explains the process of the emergence of a dissent by which there is the question of othering. The moment there is an othering, then the perception of the self. Self and the other, both the perceptions almost stand in complementarity, though there is a strong position of the, I would say, binary opposition. But interestingly, when a position of dissent comes, how the dissent comes as an innovation. Without the dissent, there is no new knowledge, no new understanding of the material and also the spiritual world is possible. After all, knowledge, which means from the unknown to the known, that is only possible by dissent, which one long time back she pointed out the two very famous Suktas of the Rig Veda, the Nasadya Sukta and the Aswabhamya Sukta. It is not that everything in early India, traditional India, is immersed in bhakti or unquestioned allegiance to what the Guru says. In a way, she has paid respect to the great religious leaders without at all championing Gurudom, which is something very common to a very large number of Indians who somehow need a Guru either in the form of a Baba or a Mataji. That she has never asking people to do constant new questioning which will have resistance. But how once the dissent is formed, then comes the gradual absorption of the dissent by what is called a self-perception and the accommodation of the dissent, which becomes the mainstream of the thought process. Then after a while, that mainstream once again gets a challenge, and therefore a new process of understanding of socio-religious conditions, the inequality, the deprivations, and some progress, if there were, then this is to be once again explained. The range is enormous and only possible by someone as gifted, as cerebrally gifted and engaging scholarship of Professor Thapar, that she could put this theme within a very handy volume of 151 pages. I would say another point, which many of you may not have known or seen. This is my personal experience. During my days in JNU, when she had already been the Professor Emeritus in the Center for Historical Studies at JNU, I have seen her speaking at the Students' Conference, Young Scholars Conference, at the regular, I would say very detailed historical studies and papers offered by major experts. I have seen her speaking at the Jawaharlal Nehru Teachers Association meeting, also at presenting and arguing with the world leaders in national and international fora. I cannot think of an occasion when she has not come with a written text. This is impossible. I have never been able to do that. I asked her once, how do you manage that? And her reply was, when she is approached by the organizers of any conference, she would know what is the theme, she would write it up as much as she would like. Then she would also learn from the organizers what will be the time span given to her. Then she will cut it down exactly according to the minute. And still at this age, she has been doing that. Please try to just understand the rigor, the discipline, the commitment to the subject. She does not need that anymore. At least since the last 30 years, she has nothing to prove to anyone. But that is the commitment to her craft, to the readers, to the audience. She must give everything, whatever she has. All the cards are placed before you. The point is, as you know well, she has many distractors. And it's people who sometimes, oh, this is a typical Marxist historian. I stand before her, I talked to her earlier. When did she apply typical Marxist formulation in her explanation of the past as Didi Kosambi, Irfan Habib, Ramcharan Sharma did and does? Her understanding emerges from social science application, and she's a remarkably strong empiricist historian. She has never given up empiricism for model building. And these emerge from her work. And this is how I would only ask you, when you have finished the book, please go to the bibliography section. I found that she has cited 84 citations in support of her argument at the end of the book. Out of 84, the book was published English version in 2020. 39, almost half of the book's citations belong to either 2006, 2007, 2019 even, 2017, 2018. She has never been churning something already said or read or dated. She could have done that. She has never compromised on the quality and the integrity of her craft. There lies Professor Thapar's hallmark. And this book, as I said, is an immersive text. It will ask you to ponder over, not to take anything straightforward. She never asked herself and asked us, her junior colleagues and the students, to take anything for granted. I recall, you may see, during the long interview I had for the frontline, and I asked her that, are you sort of nowadays a bit circumspect about your sources, with which historians have to depend on the sources, evidence? She said, oh yes, not very circumspect. I was told to be suspicious of my sources. Because what she meant, and but not spoken explicitly, is that what we call sources are all testimonies long dead. And what is now to us a source was not originally a source. Like what is, she has also referred this work in her bibliography in this little book, Banabhatta's Harshatarika, which is an indispensable work to understand the life, the reign, the activities of Harsha. Was this text written by Banabhatta as a source to be used by historians of 1,000 years later? Never so. It was a typical case of a Sanskrit high-class ornate court literature. In fact, it's kind of a eulogistic write-up, Prashasti, Charita. Some kind of, I'm not using the word hagiography, but it is something of a different genre. It's a kavya never meant for a sword. How a historian would look at these things and use it as a source is some kind of a training. And finally, I would say that this book, you go through that and you will find that once again, we are not alone. Even when we face most repressive and obscurantist, backward-looking ideas backed further by muscular, majoritarian nationalism. She is speaking of nationalism as an inclusive category, never in the form of nationalism. In the entire book, she talks about the problems, the prospects of looking at the past in the light of empirical details, and her deep understanding through the readings of various authors, understanding their standpoint, even when she criticizes someone, disagrees, and disagreements is essential for historical studies. When she does that, she is repeatedly reminding us to constantly evaluate what is at our hand, what we have read. Not merely nowadays, everyone has become a historian because people think that it's the easiest thing to write a history book. You have 5 books you summarize. Even synthesization of knowledge is an extremely tough analytical process. And people has to, even when one is not a professional historian, one has to read this work, wonderfully lucidly written, that her hallmark as always. And there you find how to integrate not only the views with which the author agrees, but how to place with respect and dignity with whom an author disagrees and distances oneself. Not merely by personal choice or dislike or like, but for the sake of argumentation. This is a book which should not only tell us how to read and write history and the past. Past is not nothing dead in this. And the other point, which is not very explicit here, but she repeated, that's one of the undercurrents. Nowadays we are repeatedly being told India's glory and pride needs to be told through the school textbook through the Indian Council of Historical Research. She reminds us that by pursuing the stories or the evidence of pride, what is actually being done is to sometimes openly, sometimes in a covert manner, prejudice against some perceived others. That is the main point. She also points out very clearly in this book the widely used cliché statement, unity in diversity, where the word diversity is almost sacrificed for underlining unity and centralization. That is a completely falsification of history, falsification even of the craft of historian. And in this land, diversity is the core and essence of any human studies, including without diversity, one does not have any scope to have a dissent voice. And I think we shall be benefited immensely by the chords she has struck in a very brief and potent, lucid manner, to stand up, to have a clear understanding of what the author is telling, in the light of what kind of evidence, and the ability to have one's own position through dissent. And it is not merely dissent, is, as she repeated it, a dissenter as the other of the self, or an established mainstream. These are two complementary positions. There may not be always a violent fight, but there could be an opposition which lead to some kind of synchronization. And that actually enriches our experience and what Indians could have contributed. And on certain occasions, there are little sidelights, like a typical well-crafted piece of diamond. She tells us that how certain words, long known in Sanskrit literature, also undergoes its meaning. One case is the term Pashanda. The Pashanda, word Pashanda is a pejorative term, particularly in classical Sanskrit texts, to mean someone who is an outcast, who is to be derided, and particularly from Brahmanical Sanskrit point of view, one who is not following the typical Brahmanical institutions and thought process, Pashanda. Where this word first was used, it was first used in Ashokan inscriptions in the sense of different faith-based sects, without any pejorative sense. How the same word has undergone a completely different meaning is only possible by a master historian of our ability and stature. So I won't take your time anymore. My only point is, let us celebrate not only this work, but the values she has been standing for, untiringly, unceasingly, and gives us once again, as I say, some hope and courage to stand before the authoritarian version of how we lead our life, what we eat, how we dress, with whom we mix, The typical Brahmanical Dharma Shastra type of injunctions cannot make us go by the trodden path of orthodoxy. And through dissent, we can go beyond orthodoxy. I think that is the signal message she has been given. This is not the first time she's been telling that. She has been a crusader for last 30 years at least on harping this point that if we espouse the cause of diversity, then the voice of dissent is absolutely essential. If we need freedom of thought, then dissent notes are absolutely essential. So I consider this to be a privilege offered to me by the Shuddha Brother and Protection that I could say these words in her presence about her book, something which I have never done before. Thank you very much.
অধ্যাপক অনুভূত চক্রবর্তীকে অনুরোধ করছি, বাংলাতেই করছি, অধ্যাপক রমিলা থাপারের হাতে বিরুদ্ধতার স্বর একটু তুলে দেবার জন্য, যাতে আপনাদের সামনে বইটি আনুষ্ঠানিকভাবে উন্মোচিত করতে পারেন।
Thapar, this is. Will it be open? Is the book visible?
Yes.
The book is visible throughout the India for the last 3 years. It's okay. Okay.
That is designed by Shubhodhi. It's your mic man.
থাপার অনুরোধ করেছেন যে প্রচ্ছদ শিল্পী, অনুবাদক, বই বিন্যাসকারী এরা সকলে মিলে ওনাকে একসঙ্গে সই করে এই বইটি দেবেন। তো এরা এদের কাছে, আচ্ছা আমরা এটা পরে করতে পারি। আমরা আমার মনে হয় যে অধ্যাপক থাপারকে অনেকক্ষণ ধরে আটকে রাখা ঠিক হবে না, কিছু মানুষ দাঁড়িয়েও আছেন। May I request you, Professor, to say a few words because everybody is waiting for that.
I must begin by saying that I'd like to begin by saying that I'm absolutely delighted to be here receiving the translation of Voices of Dissent. Delighted because I've heard such good things about what an excellent translation it is. More than other people have also mentioned this. And this is terribly important to any author, because people can take up a book and translate it and make an absolute mess of the book. But if it's a good translation and it follows what the book is saying, and arguing in favor of what the book is saying, then the author is delighted, as I am at this moment, having heard from my friend that the translation is impeccable. So thank you very much indeed to the translators. I'm also very happy with the nerve from the beginning since I'm generally a person who enjoys saying, no, I will not. So anyway, for the rest, I must say that I had thought that if I was going to speak, I would spend 10 minutes on summarizing the book. But nobody has done that. So I have to think of something a little different to say. I'll say essentially the same thing, but put it in a different way, just to sound as if I'm doing something different. His summary was very good, so I don't think I can improve upon that. But anyway, there it is. And I did, as he said, I always bring a written text. I haven't brought a written text, but I brought a few notes. So I will base myself on these. Largely because as I grow old, I tend to forget. So I may start talking about the topic and say two things and I forget the third thing. So I now, I'm afraid, have to write down all 3 points and refer to them as I'm talking. So forgive me, I'm not reading the written text, but I am reminding myself. When the book first came out, one of the questions that I frequently asked was, what is dissent? It's not a word that is very familiar 20 years ago, and certainly not in historical circles. People didn't do very much in terms of studying dissent. And my answer always was that to dissent is to question. Whatever it is that you're looking at, whichever subject that you're looking at, when you start questioning the knowledge as it is given to you, you begin to dissent. You may end up agreeing exactly with what is said, but you go through that process of asking, is this correct or not? Do I agree with this or not? And then you end up by saying yes or no. And if you say no, I don't agree, that is dissent. So I would say that dissent has a lot to do with questioning existing knowledge. And that is one thing which is essential to any advance in knowledge. You cannot advance in knowledge simply by saying, it's all been said, it's all the way it is. It's only when you start saying, should I ask this question, is this really correct, or can this be taken in a different way, expressed in a different way, and so on. Then you begin to question knowledge. Then there is the possibility that your questioning may lead to an advance in knowledge. It may lead to a different kind of knowledge. And that is something that all researchers are searching for. That we know the question, we know the subject. Are there other ways of looking at it which would advance the knowledge that we have of the subject? So dissent is essentially not violent protest. Dissent is disagreement. And it is essentially something where you argue a position back and forth and consider what is being said. Now, one of the things which is absolutely fundamental to all philosophical thinking, whether it is Greek, whether it is modern, universal, whether it is Indian, is the continuous debate that goes on between one opinion and another. I refer to it as somebody said by terms of the self and the other. The self has one opinion, the other has another opinion. Do we just leave this as it is, or do we allow for a conversation and a dialogue between the two to see what it might bring on. And in the Indian tradition, as we all know, all philosophical schools virtually, don't correct me if I say all, virtually all, indulge in this notion of the centrality of the deity. The Purva Paksha and the Parisha Paksha have to be in conversation, in dialogue with each other. They hold opposite opinions. But that dialogue, that debate, that conversation is essential for there to be what is possibly a positive outcome, which is referred to as the Siddhanta. And if you get a Siddhanta, Marcus, then you have a solution to your problem. If you don't, you carry on debating, which is also quite worthwhile and interesting. And what is interesting is that when you look at the philosophical traditions of ancient Greece, you have Socrates saying exactly this. You have the dialectical method, which is so essential to modern philosophy. Now, I'm not saying that all these methods are identical. They are different slightly. But essentially, the idea is that of the debate between different opinions and the emergence of some kind of solution. And I would particularly like to stress this as a very important component of what we call civilization. We all assume, we've all been brought up to believe that civilization consisted of a few people saying, this is what should be done, this is what we believe in, philosophy, literature, art and architecture, our aesthetics go up to a high level, all our thinking goes up to a high level. What they forget, as civilization is essentially a question of selecting from what is present and putting it together and saying, this is what we stand for. There is much in civilization which is also a rejection of various things. The selection process is very important. And consequently, even in determining something like civilization, there is an element of dissenting opinion. Not everybody agrees that certain things constitute civilization. In the book, of course, I do give a lot of space to religion and society. This is not because I give priority to religion, but because I think that in the Indian situation, there has been a lot of closeness between religion and society, which has perhaps not been that close in the early Western civilization, and certainly not that close in the early Chinese civilization. So I felt that it was necessary to go into this question, and this was really why I spoke about the whole Bhakti tradition. Because the Bhakti tradition is essentially like the earlier shamanic tradition. When Vedic Brahmanism becomes very dominant, the reaction to it comes from the Buddhists and the Jains and the Thapar and so on. What is the reaction? The reaction is that we do not accept your gods, the Vedic gods, and we do not accept the Vedas as sacred literature composed by the gods. You don't accept the gods, you don't accept the supposed literature. And this is a tradition that goes on in Indian thinking, which has not been given any emphasis to, unfortunately. I do mention it in the book. As late as the 14th century, there is a collection of philosophical teachings. And the first chapter is dedicated to Charvak thinking. And the author says, it's not that the Charvak thinking is the highest philosophical school, but it has a substantial body of followers, and therefore I am going to discuss it further. Now what's very interesting is that according to many of our historians and the general historical situation today, nobody gives the child marks any kind of privilege to them. They're always dismissed as being marginal and unimportant. Here is a firm statement saying that I'm giving the first chapter over to their teaching because they have a following. And I think that this is really a very, very important statement. And then you come on to various other traditions. And you remember that in each case, all religions that are based on sects, groups, as Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism and so on are, there has to be an element of dissent for a group to break away and say we don't accept the full teaching, we fiddle around, we accept this little bit, but we don't accept that. So there's a difference. There's a disagreement with the original teaching, not entirely, it can be quite small, it can be quite big. But there is that element, that fraction of dissent in the creation of the teaching. And this is quite clear. I mean, why is it that Kabir and Tulsi and Thapar, they're all Bhakti teachers? They're not identical. They're different. They're saying some different things. Some identical things, some different things. And we keep on stressing the sameness without going into the question of why do they differ? Why do they have different sets and different followers? And this is very important that we have to understand to make my interest in the link between religion and society was not just in the teaching of Bhakti teachers and other religious teachers, but it comes from the historical position that religion colors, gives form to social institutions. I mean, we all know, for example, that there is this link that is sought to be made between Hinduism and caste. And the big debate today is, was there such a link? Did religion actually justify the existence of caste? Because it has a huge social implications if you argue that way, if you argue the question of social equality and justice and so on. And the issue of social equality is a very important issue, especially in Bhakti teaching. As Ravi pointed out, I've done in the book, people like Ravidas and Dadu and Kabir are essentially emphasizing the importance of social equality. Now this is something quite distinctly different from the traditional Orthodox thinking of both the Brahmins as well as the Islamic groups that come in. One is that Sufism has some people who follow the Muslim Orthodoxy, but has large numbers of schools that are opposed to the Islamic Orthodoxy. It's dissent, again, it's a disagreement. And there's a great deal of discussion and conversation going on between the Bhakti teachers and the Sufis. In the Punjab, for example, you cannot study the Nath-Yogi movement without looking at the Sufis. And you cannot study the Sufis without going into the question of the Nath-Yogi. There is a great closeness that goes on, which continues for a long, long time. But the point that I am trying to make over here is that the very fact that you have sects in a religion, breakaway groups, means that there is an element of dissent, and that element has to be taken very, very seriously. What happens when we come to the colonial period? There is change. One reaction is, of course, that all the Samajas come up, Brahmo Samaj, Arya Samaj, Prashna Samaj, and they're all supporting elements of the Orthodox tradition, but with a certain amount of reformation as well that is going on in all the different schools. And then you get the colonial interpretation, which of course is right down the middle of religion and says India consisted of two religious communities, the Hindus and the Muslims, constantly in conflict. So the two-nation theory and the idea of the Hindu-Muslim conflict comes out of colonial writing. Mill's history of British India is a clear statement of it. And unfortunately, or fortunately, Indian writers took this up, made it their own theories. You had Savarkar on the one hand and you had Jinnah on the other, completely endorsing a colonial theory. And this is something which they forget, that this two-nation theory is in fact the contribution of colonial writing. There is nothing indigenous to it. And we should keep that in mind when we're considering what's going on. You know, the last aspect of this that I discussed in the book is how the national movement, in a way, picks up on this end. And the two things that Gandhi is associated with, dharma and satyagraha, are straight out of this deceptive tradition. Very interesting. To me, at least, that explains why Gandhi suddenly organized what's called a Mahatma. What makes people think of him as a Mahatma? Because his teachings are part of this older tradition that has come down. And similarly, the idea of doing a dharma is very common. In Rajasthan, opposition was always expressed by doing a dharma. And those of us who are in institutions today know what it means when students do dharmas against teachers. This is an old established tradition that we have to learn to understand. It's not something alien. It's part of our cultural classic. That if we wish to express disagreement, we can do it in this form. Remembering always that this dissent and disagreement has to be non-violent. This is absolutely essential. And to that extent, I think that Gandhi's teaching was again part of this tradition. He doesn't go too far away from the traditional notions of dissent, as I described before, and of course the other more contemporary notions of dissent. So let me then just conclude by saying that I think what I have hoped to do in this book is to try and suggest that the kinds of thoughts I've put forward are just the tip of the iceberg. There is much more dissenting thought and much more thought along these lines in our traditions of philosophy and history and writing and literature and so on than we have given place to in our assessment of what is called Indian civilization. And I think that we should now turn to looking at, not necessarily looking for in an unrealistic way, but looking at what are quite obviously indications of dissent and trying to understand the role that dissent played in the formation of what we call Indian culture.